wait a little, like wait as people trickle in.
We've been told we're late though, so now I'm like, do people know? Like, should we just start? But it's okay. We probably let people trickle in, especially on Twitter.
YouTube doesn't look like we're there yet to me.
Yeah, we'll wait a little. Give it like 5 minutes, 3 minutes.
Oh, okay. To like display us on YouTube.
Oh, we are live on YouTube.
We are on YouTube. Oh, okay.
Let's go.
Sarah, send it, Sarah.
Okay, we want to start. We're live. Great.
We're live. Let's go.
Okay. All right. We are joined with some incredible people today. Very excited for this YouTube Live Spaces. I think, we obviously announced big vision for V4 yesterday. I think before we start, just want to make sure everyone knows they can go over to the YouTube channel, drop questions in the chat. We'll try to get to some of them, but we also have some questions prepared for our audience here today. I think maybe why don't, first, before we get into any of the questions, I think it would be good to go around and kind of introduce ourselves, what team we all work on. And I can go first. Sarah on our protocols team. Austin and I will be kind of moderating the conversation today.
I guess I'll go next. So I'm Austin and I work on our research team, not the protocols team, sadly. Who's next? Maybe try to like tell someone. I'll send Alice. Alice, you're next.
I'm Alice. I'm also on the protocols team. And Austin, you're an honorary member.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Noah.
Hey, I'm Noah, also on the protocols team. Been around for a while. Many of you maybe have seen my face before. This is in place of the Twitch stream, which I did to introduce V3. So get your questions in now. This is last chance.
They only know Walmart, Noah. They don't know real.
I'll popcorn to Emily.
Yo, I'm Emily, and I'm also on the protocols team. That's what we're saying, right? Yeah. Cool. I'll bounce it over. Has Mark gone yet? Mark's muted.
Oh, Mark.
Muted Mark. It wouldn't be live without technical issues.
Hey guys, can you hear me now? I'm Mark, on the protocols team as well. Hopefully this lives up to your old Twitch stream, Noah, because that one was pretty legendary.
I guess just me left. I'm Hayden, been working on Uniswap for a while. Also wish I was on the protocols team, but sadly I am the CEO. Super excited to be here. And yep. Yeah.
All right, perfect. Yeah, thanks everyone for coming. So I think Sarah said this a little bit earlier, but Sarah and I will be moderating the conversation with the amazing cast of characters we have assembled today. So I guess the first question is to our fearless leader, Hayden, who also shares a last name with me, but no relation. What is the vision for Uniswap V4? And we're all curious, when you created Uniswap V1, did you see us landing in this place? Or has it come together over time and with different iterations of the protocol?
That is a multi-step, multifaceted question.
I will remind you if you need to.
Okay, I'm going to start with the V1 section of it. I think that definitely when creating Uniswap V1, it was kind of more like, an experiment in can you build something that's extremely decentralized on top of Ethereum, and maybe this AMM thing can work, and maybe it has some place in the world. Definitely did not imagine any of the things that followed, or how much of a life it would take on, or that this many years later we would still be working on a V4 that is doing all the things that V4 does. So definitely was a very, very different world back then. I'd say that definitely seeing all the things that were built on V1 kind of was what got us to build a V2, and all the things built on, all the traction, excitement, and development around V2 was what made it worth building a V3. And so I think each version of the protocol has been built on the previous version. For V4, it was really about making Uniswap much more powerful of a developer platform and much more expressive. Definitely there's a lot of innovation that happens in the space, a lot of other AMMs, a lot of cool projects built on top of Uniswap. And right now, they're a little bit restricted in how they can interact with Uniswap V3. Uniswap V3 is very powerful, but also quite opinionated. And there's a lot of trade-offs that had to be made. And the process of designing an AMM, as everyone on this call knows, is basically just like arguing all day, every day about random small trade-offs and just bike shedding endlessly. And the reason for that is basically every single decision you make has, impacts multiple other, things. And, a very simple example is that like the Oracle that we built into V2 and V3 was very good for external integrations, but increased gas costs for swappers. And that's sort of like the very simple example. And with Uniswap V4, we wanted to basically expose a trade-off space and let people who are deploying pools choose the properties of those pools. And there's a lot of cool like AMM and design. There's cool, exciting experiments around like how do we like make fees more competitive? How do we have LPs less exposed to impermanent loss, which is a fun word. Maybe we should talk about that one at some point. Really, just like it's very hard. Building an entire AMM around a single change to the protocol is very it's a lot of work and not very efficient. And I'd say that some ideas are really interesting, but kind of need to be validated. And it's possible that no single pool design is best for all possible pairs. And so the core of V4 with hooks and Singleton, all of that is around, we build a system where people can build much more customizable pools that add on new features, that make different trade-offs, and allows for just greater experimentation in the AMM space and more powerful things built on top of it. And then all the other aspects of V4 are like, how can we do that in a way that like is maximally efficient and saves gas for users.
Yeah, so I want to dig into like really want to go deeper there, but I think before that, I think a lot of people come to Twitter, they see Uniswap, just kind of release this vision for V4, and their first thought is, okay, well, how is it different from V3? So I want to spend some time there. Like you're new, you don't really know what's going on with V4. I'm kind of want to send this over to Noah. How would you, in like a few sentences, explain like kind of some of these big differences from V3?
Yeah, I think to me, V3 was sort of the best expression of an AMM that we thought was going to meet the sort of the most, needs of users of a DEX sort of 2 years ago. Introduced concentrated liquidity. It sort of hardened and improved the Oracle system. It was as gas efficient as we could make it without sacrificing security and things like that. And yeah, we felt that I think it was basically as good as we could have made it at that time. And I think since then we've realized, and I think not just we, meaning sort of not just Uniswap Labs, but sort of crypto as a whole, has realized that there's never going to be, as Hayden mentioned, a single instantiation of something that's going to ever meet everyone's needs in a sort of reasonable way. And so to me, I think V4 is about removing the sort of slightly discretionary choices that we made for V3 to the extent possible, and providing more of a neutral platform for others to make the choices that previously we had made. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm happy to go into architectural differences and nuance, maybe later in the call, and I'm sure others will as well. But to me, the highest level point here is that V4 is more of a platform for AMMs, whereas V3 was the specific best AMM we thought we could make as Uniswap Labs 2 years ago.
Yeah, I actually think it would be really interesting to kind of talk a little bit more about this like Oracle piece. So like, building the Oracle into V3, that was a really opinionated decision. Like, do you see any downsides of now having that like be outside of the protocol, or, kind of talk, like, can you talk a little bit about that trade-off space there?
Yeah, so the existence of an Oracle in an AMM, I would say, is a classic example of a public good, which is like an economics term where there's something that's being provided, which is generally good to exist, but which no individual party is incentivized to sort of create or maintain. So basically, we imposed a sort of fixed gas cost on the first swapper of every block for every pool on Uniswap V3 in order to maintain this Oracle functionality. And this was not opt-in, right? It was mandatory across all pools. And this is sort of our way of forcing this capability to be available for every pool, and hoping that there would be products that came up which were going to be based on these oracles. That somewhat panned out, but again, I think I mentioned that we no longer sort of feel comfortable imposing that choice on people. Given the the again increasing number of tokens and mechanisms that people are using, the specific type of oracle that we introduced in V3 just no longer felt sufficient, given the proof of stake launch 6 months ago, and a lot of research that Austin and others have done on the security of this oracle. So we felt it was sort of time to rip that out of the core, save people some gas on sort of normal swaps, and then let teams, including ourselves, but really teams that are going to be driving feature development on oracles, make decisions on their own that are going to be best suited for their protocol. And so this was a little hard for me, because like oracles were definitely my baby in V3, but I think this is, again, ultimately the mission of the fact that we can't solve everyone's problems for them, and to some extent you have to you have to be able to let the sort of marketplace decide what the best solution is there. So
one thing that might be helpful, I can quickly hop in and like show my new favorite oracle design as an example of like something that like hooks enable. So today, we know it talks about like hooks as a public good, right? The people who are paying for the public good, it's basically all swappers in the protocol, or technically it's the first swapper of each block, and subsequent swaps in the block don't pay for it. And that's a very like strange group of people to kind of be like subsidizing the cost of an oracle. My favorite kind of current hook design, sort of oracle design, irregardless of like the specific functions of that oracle, whether it's a median or average. My favorite oracle design is one where whoever wants to maintain the oracle can pay, to deposit ETH into the contract, and then basically the percentage of the gas of a swap that is used to update the oracle is refunded by the oracle contract. And then in this way, swappers don't have to pay, but anyone who wants to maintain an oracle can basically just like maintain a little balance of ETH that subsidizes the oracle and will keep it up to date. And you can make sure that it's not like gameable by using base fee or whatever. We don't maybe a little don't need to go all the way into that, but just the example of like letting hooks allow you to let anyone pay for the cost of an oracle, not just swappers, and that's pretty cool as well.
Yeah, sort of on the hook background and sort of on hooks, I guess the protocols team has been doing a lot of the thinking about what are the hooks and like what are possible hooks that could exist. So what is each of yours favorite hook, and what are you most excited about? So I'm supposed to go with Sarah first. So no repeating, it's against the rules.
Okay, I have to go?
Yeah, you're first. It's fun.
Okay, I guess I get the easy answer because I get to go first. I would say TWAM. I think I'm very excited for this potential for submitting long-term orders, that basically can execute over a period of time. I took the low-hanging fruit there. Sorry, guys.
That's okay. That's unfortunate for MLA, but I shall hopefully come up with one. So I guess Mark is next.
Yeah, I'm really excited about the dynamic fees hook. I think there's some really interesting design space there to make pools more efficient and better for LPs, and it's just like a whole design space that we've never really been able to explore before. And I think some really exciting stuff you can do there.
So then Alice, I guess.
I can go with one of the features that's I think been more asked for, or I've seen people tweeting saying they want limit orders. On V3 we supported range orders, which are kind of like a limit order, other than the fact that if you're not fast enough to withdraw your money, it reverses again, which is an unfortunate feature. And on V4 we can implement hooks that don't reverse the order, so you can actually have limit orders on V4, which is great.
And then we'll go with Emily. So we'll make you last. We'll make someone else. We'll make Noah or Hayden last.
Go last.
Well, I spent an arduous couple months on TWAM, so I have to give a shout out there. We're still working on it, but that's a super exciting one. especially, Uniswap couldn't really facilitate really big orders before without being exposed to a lot of slippage. So it's really exciting to be able to kind of bring in that new use case for bigger orders. But I guess I have to also bring up some others. It goes real fast. What else? We'll move on to Noah, and then I'll come back to you.
I'll throw it to Noah then.
Well, I've always wanted, so we don't have really a design for this yet, but maybe someone out there in the wild does. I would love to see a hook that sort of figures out how to auction off the first, top of the block arbitrage trade. This is like a classic case of LPs leaking value to arbitrageurs who are monitoring off-chain price movements and sort of exploiting discrepancies between those and between off-chain prices and on-chain prices on Uniswap. And so, there's a variety of ways to potentially solve this with, auctions for, again, top of block trading rights, things like that. I would love to see more innovation on MEV capture with the intent of redistributing it to LPs. So if you've got any ideas, hit us up, publish your code. Let's talk about it.
So hit those DMs; they're always open. So
another idea we've been toying around with lately is trying to get some pools back with some fungible liquidity for people who kind of missed that feature in V3. So we're exploring, creating pools that take advantage of gas savings on V4, et cetera, without, from Singleton, but getting some of the benefits back that people saw in V2.
Yeah, and then Hayden, you sort of gave us a little bit of a shill already, so you can either continue the shill or go with a different one.
I have plenty.
Perfect.
A few ones I'm excited about. Super excited about yield-bearing hooks. Honestly, like right now, with the way that V3 works, right? Liquidity, like the pool is split up into all these discrete hooks or ticks. Oh no, we have hooks and ticks. Split up into all these discrete ticks, and basically only liquidity, the only liquidity that's used for a given swap is the liquidity that is sitting in like the current tick. And if the tick crossed out of range, maybe it's the current tick plus the next tick. But most liquidity is just kind of like sitting idly most of the time. And so definitely with hooks, it's very possible to take liquidity that's currently not in range and deposit it into lending protocols. You can also have it in liquid staked ETH type of situations, and generally very possible to earn additional yield by keeping out of range liquidity in other systems and only withdrawing it as needed, either on a given swap or across periods of time. That's one of them. I'd say that generally speaking, I'm just quite excited about a lot of innovation that's happening externally to Uniswap now happening internally through hooks. Really, almost any project that is currently building its own AMM, it's very possible it could be worth it for that project. And it depends. It's not literally always the case, but it's very possible that many projects that are currently building their own AMMs or experimenting with new AMM designs will now just build that within Uniswap. And one interesting reason for that is that if all you're really doing is changing how the fee mechanism works, then you can easily express that as a hook. And if what you care about is the economics and incentives and all that, you can still kind of do that. And there's sort of a network effect to doing that within the Uniswap protocol, where you get much more efficient routing against other pools that are also using hooks and also in the same system. And so it can be worth it, even if you care about even if there's an economic incentive to have your own system, you could still sort of layer that on top of the Uniswap protocol, and it can be net beneficial on both sides because of the gas efficiency savings of being in this shared system. So that's pretty cool as well.
Yeah, I actually think that's a great transition point to this next question, which I want to dig into a little bit. I'm going to throw this one to you, Mark. But yeah, one of the key pieces of V4 is kind of two new big architectural changes. We refer to them as Singleton and flash accounting. Mark, can you talk a little bit about what that means and how, where we see this gas savings from?
Sure. Yeah. I'll talk about the Singleton mostly. Singleton is honestly pretty much across the board gas benefits for Uniswap V4 over V3, especially in terms of deploying new pools, which are now just initializing some state as opposed to deploying a whole new contract. I think it's something like 90 X% cheaper. It's pretty crazy. And also doing like multi-pool swaps are much cheaper because you no longer have to transfer tokens across different pools. You can sort of just, you know, internally map the sort of intermediate swaps and only transfer tokens in and transfer tokens out on the swap. And it actually was super easy to make this change over V3 because the pool state is pretty decoupled from the nominal balance of the pool already. Like basically the pool state is just derived on like, you know, all the adds and all the removes of liquidity and all the swaps and so on. And so we basically just store like the diff of the balances over every swap and every change. And it basically, yeah, was a pretty easy change to make. But it's actually super critical on V4, I think, to have these multi-pool swaps be cheaper. And this is mostly just because there's going to be so many more pools on V4. Like there's an infinite possibility of pools even for any given pair of tokens, because you can set any fee tier, you can set any fee any tick spacing, any number of hooks. And so there's just going to be so many more pools and so much more like so many more, you know, areas of liquidity. And so this makes it much simpler and much cheaper to do these multi-pool swaps and actually access all of these different like smaller sources of liquidity, if that makes sense. And yeah, I think one more really useful piece that's very associated to the Singleton is the Flash accounting system, which helps us make these, you know, the intermediary accounting I was talking about. And maybe, Sarah, you guys want to talk more about that?
Yes, that leads us into sort of our next question, which is for Sarah and Alice. So you guys are going to ECC and you're going to give a wonderful talk about Uniswap V4, which is wonderfully named "Lock Me Up and Call Me Baby" with a smiley face emoji. Can you talk a little bit about Flash accounting and how it works with lock and call, and how this is sort of done via EIP 1153 or transient storage?
Yeah,
Sure.
Alice, do you want to take it away? And if there's anything left.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Thanks for plugging our talk. Everyone come watch. So Flash accounting is, I'm sure lots of people have heard of Flash loans, which is where transactions have this atomic way of loaning out money, and you can do whatever you want with it as long as you give it back by the end. And if you don't give it back by the end, then the whole thing reverts, almost like they never gave you the money in the first place. And so Flash accounting is essentially this broader space of things you can do, but with a similar accounting method where basically the contract can keep track of all the positive and negative balances as the transaction goes on, of how much you owe the pool, how much the pools owe you. And at the end of the transaction, if those balances aren't zero, it can revert. And this allows us to give a lot of flexibility to how much can be achieved in one transaction, how people can trade between lots of different pools, the multi-step thing that Mark was talking about. And then the name lock me up and call me baby, is how we achieve these complex transactions. Basically, users will lock the contract at the beginning, and then they can call as many functions as they want. They can perform swaps on any pool. They can add and remove liquidity. And then once they're done with whichever calls they want to do, they unlock the contract again, and it'll check that their balances have reached zero. And if they haven't, then everything will revert. And if they have, then great. And what was the other thing? Transient storage. Sarah, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I can talk about it briefly. Yeah, I think that was a really good explanation, and kind of on that note of like checking that things are zeroed out before the end of the transaction. This specific property is a really good use case for transient storage, because it means we're using storage throughout the duration of the transaction, but we're not actually, you know, saving that post-transaction. And so, you know, when enabled with transient storage, this becomes a lot more efficient. And that's where we get to see some of these, you know, gas optimizations. Yeah. I don't know. Do you have anything else to add onto that, Alice, or anyone else?
I don't think so. I think you covered that well.
Cool. I think we'll kind of transition this here, and I want to talk about one specific hook, which is TWAM. I know people are really excited about this. Emily gave like a little kind of brief intro into what it is. But yeah, how can you maybe give like a, you know, TWAM 101 kind of explainer, and, you know, how should people think about using, you know, a pool that has TWAM hook enabled on it?
Sure. Yeah, so TWAM, time, wait, just what does it stand for? I say TWAM all the time, and time weighted average market maker. Is that yeah, we're a time weighted average market maker.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, basically instead of doing a simple swap, routing across many pools, you can decide to sort of take a dollar cost average approach to swapping your funds over time. And so kind of similar to how Oracle works, and I'm sure a lot of pools will have hooks like this that sort of take some functionality on the first transaction of every block to update something, whether, that's how we did Oracles and V3. And so for TUM, the first swap of the block would subsidize kind of shifting these orders. So it kind of ends up just being this continuous shift of funds happening over time between the two tokens that people take positions for two long-term orders that kind of trade against each other. And so the way hooks work, they can kind of interact with the pool the same as any other an integrator or anyone interacting with the pool can. They have just the same access to the swap function, same access to the pool as an everyday user. So as these pools trade against each other, the TUM will look the price up in the pool and be able to kind of swap the difference between these two orders trading against each other. So that's kind of the gist of how TWAM operates.
And what about like some, I guess, like interesting like use cases for TWAM? Like why would someone want this? Like what sort of like improvements does it offer, I guess?
Yeah, so, I don't know, say Uniswap governance decides, hey, we want to diversify our treasury. We want to take this big chunk of Uni and hold it in a stable coin. To do that kind of in a decentralized way, because these funds are kind of held in Ethereum. It would be hard to do that in a centralized exchange. So now you can use something like a decentralized exchange to go and make a really big, bulky order like that and not have to worry about the slippage that gets involved with doing kind of purely on-chain interactions. I think would be a pretty good use case for TWAM.
Yeah, I'll add that I think it's just any time that a trade will have a big price impact, that's a good use case for TWAM. So if you want to make just a large trade on a more illiquid pair, you could just open a TWAM that executes over a few blocks to 10 minutes to an hour. If you want a dollar cost average into something, just anytime you want to make a very large order, right, that where it would be worth it to split up into multiple transactions, but then you have to pay the gas and have the user experience. It's probably better to do a TWAM. But to Emily's point, definitely on-chain DAO treasury rebalancing is a super interesting one as well.
I think a follow-up question that is on the top of the mind for everyone is it TWAM or is it TWAM?
Or some other variation.
Yeah,
I think it's TWAM.
TWAM.
I always thought it was TWAM. No,
I didn't know that.
No, I think Dan actually, I think the original TWAM paper, which by the way, we should mention, came from, basically it was a paper Paradigm put out. I think that, yeah, he does, in it, he actually says the pronunciation at the top of the paper. So the paper says, we call it the time weighted average market maker, or TWAM, pronounced TWAM. So it is TWAM officially, according to Dan, who invented it, I think.
TWAM. I think I say TWAM, but
you do not say TWAM. You say
TWAM.
TWAM.
She does.
I think
she does.
The verbal pronunciation here, I'll send it in our chat. That's how Dan said it. The H makes it WAM, not WAM, but maybe it is WAM.
Is that a WAM? It's a super interesting hook. It was definitely V3 introduced a lot of complexity with ticks. Anyone who's looked at the V2 code versus the V3 code will see how much just that one feature kind of, added to the code base. So it was definitely a challenge to develop gas efficiently because we kind of have to predict how the AMM is going to move, and we have to track those movements from tick to tick. So, you know, I'm looking forward to taking it and improving the gas more. And if the community has any input or loves to optimize, that would be some really great open source contributions too. It is a GPL contract.
Well, one thing I found very interesting about TWAM, which I'll just mention, that we haven't really talked about much anywhere, is that it's an example of maybe a hook that is like sometimes mutually incompatible with other hooks. And it sort of gets at like something that Dan has talked about a bunch in the past, which is that like you only have so much complexity points to spend in AMM design. Like the more complicated thing, like if you're doing like, you know, more than 2 assets, right, then it's very hard to do concentrated liquidity. Like doing like 3+ asset concentrated liquidity is like insanely complicated. If you're doing TWAM, it's actually impossible. It makes certain Oracle designs much harder. Right, we kind of pretty quickly figured like the sort of base Oracle design that we have, implemented as an example hook is actually like incompatible with the TWAM hook. And it's because of like the complexity of TWAM, and it has to do with like the oracles often rely on things not changing between blocks. But the idea of TWAM is that it's executing over time, not, you know, on a block by block. And so the price actually moves in between blocks with TWAM, and that makes it much harder to track the average price across that period. And so that's like sort of an interesting aspect of TWAM and hooks.
I believe we're gonna need some like crazy calculus to actually make it work, and the gas just like we didn't want to go there.
Which is what's so nice about hooks is we can like figure it out later in the hook implementation rather than having to, you know, build it all in hard coded, which would be messy.
Yeah, perfect. So I think we'll open up to some just general questions, and anyone can answer if they feel a certain way about it. So this question is about open sourcing versus publicizing the code. So Hayden, you want to speak a little bit about what it means to build in public and what do we mean by open sourcing?
Yeah, maybe I'll even pass it to Noah. I feel like Noah is the OG Uniswap, but I can also speak to it as well.
Yeah, well, maybe you can just talk on the general plane, but on the license specifically, I'm happy to chime in. So, yeah, I'm very aware of the sort of open source available debate. I'm pretty much a copyleft maxi. All my personal code is GPL. I basically have only ever written GPL, or something that eventually becomes GPL, like BUSL. So yeah, basically my take on BUSL is, yes, technically according to, you know, Free Software Society or whatever, it's source available, not open source. But I think the important thing, so there's 2 points here. The first is that we're binding ourselves to GPLing the code along, you know, on a sort of concrete time horizon. So I think that's super important. Ultimately, innovation is a super long-term process, and you know, in the long term, not like the world dead long term, you know, of economists, like in the very short sort of 4-year for V4 or 2-year for V3 long term, you know, the code is going to be GPL, right? So you have that to look forward to. And then in the short term, really, the sort of proprietary license or the non open source aspect of BUSL is really just intended to prevent the very low effort forks that are honestly kind of not actually bringing value add to anyone. You know, and especially given that hooks are meant to be extremely extensible, extremely flexible, you know, you can build a lot of things on top of them, and a fork might not be the sort of best way to express, you know, an opinion about how the code should work. But, you know, to the extent that it is, again, there's a pathway, right, through governance or through just waiting the 4 years until GPL. So, you know, I think this is a reasonable balance between sort of incentivizing innovation and giving sort of exclusive rights for sort of short duration, which, by the way, has precedent in like normal settings as well, like, you know, drug patents, copyright, etc. So, yeah, I think that there's a balance between that and then the sort of ethos, which we all frankly share, of open source. And so, I'm pretty happy with where we landed on V3 and V4, with the only difference to V4 being that we added another 2 years to the GPL extension. So, yeah, I'll leave it there. Hayden, maybe you want to jump in if I miss anything, but.
No, I can jump in. I guess the other part of the conversation just around like building in. Was there a sort of a building in public part of that question as well? I don't remember the
Yeah. Yeah, I think it'd be nice to talk about like what does it mean to build in public, and you know, how we can just start with that.
Great. Yeah, I think that like for us, you know, the previous versions of the protocol, right? It was like the entire thing was built, we announced it, and then it was like basically by the time we announced it, the code was basically frozen under audit and like gearing up to you know, a launch within like a month or so. And I think that worked at the time. And you know, I don't know if there's any regrets there, but I think that like there was like one of the biggest pieces of feedback that to me actually really resonated around the V3 launch was like, oh, this thing is pretty complicated. You know, we're one, you know, and there's like thousands of projects being built on top of V2. Like, you know, there's not enough time to integrate. There's not enough time to give feedback. There were even a few like people who opened up like PRs to try to, you know, modify V3 with minor like gas savings and stuff like that. And so the sort of feedback was like, you know, like to me, like Uniswap is this piece of infrastructure for the entire ecosystem at this point, right? There's so many projects being built on top of it, so many users, you know, so much market share for on-chain trading, and you know, I see it in really long run as something that feels like and looks like Ethereum, and like just like with Ethereum, you know, people have a lot of time to give feedback and input into, you know, Ethereum upgrades. There's a lot of time to give. People have a lot of time to prepare to integrate, right? All of the different infrastructure and projects built on top of Ethereum has months and months to prepare as Ethereum upgrades are developed and prepare to go live. And I think that, you know, with where Uniswap is right now and today, and you know, with how people have talked about it in the past, like it makes total sense for me for it to be built in public, and you know, really get more feedback and input. Because I think that, you know, ultimately it will make it stronger. And even in like the one day that it's been public, we've already had people like find little bugs, and you know, bugs were somewhat expected at this point. It hasn't been audited yet, and you know, it won't be audited for a while until after the code is frozen. But you can sort of just see like, you know, the map, like just giving all the different teams and projects building on top of it time to give feedback, to contribute to it, ultimately will create like a much more powerful system. And at the launch, when it actually goes live on mainnet, you know, there'll be so much more. The entire ecosystem will have like a huge head start and a huge, you know, like it won't just be in the past. It's like almost only labs has been able to like start developing the interface work before the protocol is ready. And this time, like we haven't started the interface work. So if you get started today, you're ahead of us, and that's pretty cool. So and maybe it's not worth it to start today because the code might change and you might have to rework it. So I don't necessarily recommend that, but that's a little bit of like where some of the building in public comes from. We think it's just like good vibes generally.
Yeah. And so, you know, Alice, Emily, and Mark, we're seeing, you know, PRs and issues and questions pop up in the repos already, you know, as of yesterday. I'm curious, like, is there anything notable that you've seen, or, you know, is there anything in particular you're excited about, like, working with the community on in, like, kind of reviewing some of these PRs, or any areas you think that are, you know, most suitable for, like, kind of community contributions?
I can say something. Yeah, I've been reading all the issues and pull requests that have been coming in today. I think a lot of them at the moment include like questions about how things work, why things are designed in a certain way. But even that just started getting me excited because it shows that there's so many people out there who are getting interested in what we're doing, want to help build, want to help us solve some of these problems. There's one person brought up an interesting idea about a malicious owner, which is cool, and we've been talking about. And I think hooks are particularly the area where people are going to be able to bring a lot of value. And I think we're all really excited to see the hooks that people come up with that we haven't thought of, or in areas that we just like hadn't even considered. So I'm particularly excited to see people jump into actually the periphery repo and start shilling some hook ideas.
I mean, someone bringing up the malicious owner issue, that's like definitely a bug. So someone already found something pretty crucial. So that, I mean, that's good. Audit in real time as we go.
Yeah, very
I think one other cool thing about building in public is that, like, we really wanted V4 to be very easy to build on top of. And so, you know, we're building it, designing it, trying to think about what types of things would make for a good developer experience and what types of interfaces people would want. But like, we can't think of everything. And so having the developers that are actually going to be building on top be able to see the code before it's done and live, maybe they have some feedback on how we can make it easier to develop on, and like maybe there's some new hook entry points that people need, or maybe there's some, other, I don't know, different things that we can do that will make it easier to build on. So I don't know. I think that's cool.
Totally.
Yes, I guess we have a potentially interesting question probably for Hayden. So I think people in this sphere of the narratives have been sort of talking about Uniswap V4 being very similar to some other protocols out there. Do you think it's sort of a novel innovation? And like, if so, like, what do you think is the novel innovation?
Yeah, that's a great question. And maybe like a starting place for that answer is, it kind of reminds me a little bit of the like who invented Uniswap question. Some people say I invented Uniswap. Some people say Vitalik invented Uniswap. Some people say Alan Liu from Gnosis invented Uniswap. Some people say nice guy, and then some people say that an economist in the 1970s invented Uniswap. And I think that like in that sense, like maybe all of us invented Uniswap, and it's just everyone building on top of prior work, and sometimes it's being directly built, sometimes it's being built in parallel. I think that like generally like good ideas sort of evolve over time, and like they sort of like weave in and out, and like a lot of people have contributed, and so like definitely a huge amount of respect to all the people in the AMM space who have innovated, and definitely like as an example, like definitely Balancer V2 did have something that looked and felt a lot like Singleton, and how we do the accounting is actually is very different, and how hooks work versus like there's definitely like differences and similarities. I think that like the best sort of designs went out over time. I think that definitely there have been projects that I've never heard of that said that we copied them for V4, and so like in a sense it's hard to copy something you don't know of or have never heard of. But like generally speaking, like there's a huge amount of innovation in the space. I think that probably like the most novel thing, I mean, I think that like it's probably like how it all comes together, like in the end, right? Like we think that like what we're building with V4 is better than anything else out there, and will allow for the best DEX platform. So that's what we're excited about, and it's kind of the combination of all the parts that we've been talking about on this call. Our specific design for hooks, our specific a system for flash accounting, and whether or not like it parallels, like definitely there are parallels to other projects, and we don't I think that other people also get to have their it's makes sense for people who want to talk about their own projects and their own innovations, and I think that's totally fair and reasonable, and again huge amount of love and respect for them.
Cool. I want to ask, I think maybe one more question before we take some questions from the audience. I want to know if, as we were, building, kind of coming up with some of the architecture around V4, are there any sort of ideas or features out there that were eventually scrapped? And if you guys can think of any and talk through some of the decisions there. Anyone?
I feel like every idea kind of was just like, oh, we can do that as a hook. Like we scrapped everything internally.
What was something that was going to be internal that is now a hook?
I think we were talking about TWAM just being internal to all the AMM, all the pools for a while. But ultimately, with the conversation of everything's customizable or taking the Oracle out, it just felt, and development-wise, it felt a lot cleaner to, bring that in as a hook.
Yeah, I think that where like this came up is most relevant is that like doing something hard coded internally, there are like some level of gas optimization sometimes beyond doing it externally in a hook. And so where we thought like this hook might be universally, and so like the Oracle it took us a while to get to the place emotionally of like, okay, the Oracle's just a hook now. Because like there might have been like very marginal benefits, but then those marginal benefits are offset by the fact that Oracle isn't really useful in all situations. And maybe that's not the best Oracle design. And so it ultimately was worth, pulling the Oracle out and saying you're a hook now. I guess that's no.
I think realizing geomean couldn't work well with TWAM was a huge drove that conversation at one point too.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think the one thing I very much miss was we had a few more hooks, like places that hooks could come in that were sort of gas inefficient. I was a big fan of all like just every single place should have a place for a hook. For every operation in V4 should have a hook.
Every other line of code should be
every
a
other
hook.
line of code. But it was a little expensive.
One of my babies was definitely a hook on tick crossing, right? Because right now we only have hooks on before and after swap, but you don't have it at every single tick that gets crossed. I guess what ultimately there's sort of like a gas inefficiency of that. That one was an actual trade-off we had to make, because there was it's less efficient, but it also means for use cases that need to execute on hooks, you have to kind of simulate the transaction before running it. And that also has gas efficiency. So there's a gas efficiency trade-off in it's pretty kind of bespoke, niche use cases. But definitely is a interesting one.
I don't know if I'm remembering this incorrectly. I feel like also there was conversations around how much power a hook has. Can a hook just go in and have access to the price and change the square root price? Or, but I think we decided that eventually they will just have as much access to pool state as any other user of the pool.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Right.
I don't know if my memory is failing me on that, but
I think we're going to switch over to some audience questions now. So let me just read through. All right, we got one question. Do you have a date for V4? I'm guessing they mean actually deployed on chain.
I wonder if you want to answer that one, Sarah.
Yeah, I can answer that. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely no set date. I think open sourcing V4 yesterday was a big first kind of moment, and probably what's going to be a months-long process of kind of finishing the code. I think there's still a lot of work left to do, especially in periphery, and a lot of optimization that could be done in core. So there's definitely no deployment date. Also, we think that the best possible design for V4 uses transient storage. And so, I think EIP 1153 introduces transient storage, and that is slated for the next Ethereum hard fork in the Cancun hard fork. And there's not really a date for that. So yeah, no date, but we're hoping maybe later this year. Austin, is there any other audience questions?
Yeah, I think another good audience question was about the security of hooks. So do we have to sort of be more, do users have more security concerns that they should be aware of? Who wants to do it? Maybe
a pool can be deployed with a malicious hook. Someone can code a hook that's one thing to look out for. You don't want a hook that's completely upgradable. You can just they can set dynamic fees and take a lot of fees on liquidity. I think they have a lot of power in that regard. So they could also brick a pool. You could if you have a hook on every action and then it reverts because of something. So yeah, hooks need to be extremely well audited before the pool can be accepted by the community.
Yeah, one thing that's kind of cool about the way I see hooks security is kind of like smart contract security. Ethereum, isn't cool because it's impossible to make unsafe smart contracts. Ethereum is cool because it's possible to create safe smart contracts. And it's the same thing with hooks. Anyone can do, the same way that anyone can create a malicious token, anyone can create a malicious hook. But it's also the way that we developed hooks, it's very possible to create very safe hooks. And it's much easier to create a safe hook than it is to create an entirely from scratch safe AMM. Right, so if you're developing in the AMM space, it's much easier to handle security by doing it through hooks. But yeah, definitely our UI, right? Our front end isn't going to just the same way that aggregators integrate multiple protocols, but they'd only integrate a protocol that has been audited and safe. Our interface will integrate many hooks, but only integrate hooks where we feel confident in the security. And I'd say that there's a few properties of hooks that make it very easy to, or not that make it reasonable to create very safe hooks. So one example is that which access points the hooks can interact with are locked in at pool creation, meaning that you can't create a hook that only modifies swap fee and then later on have it run at the beginning and end of modified position. The places that hooks can interact with are kind of fixed. Another important hook safety property is that you can create immutable hooks. To Emily's point, any upgradable hook can upgrade into anything. It won't be able to access new access points, but it can do things that you weren't expecting. And so I think that, like, in my mind, like, vast majority of hooks should be immutable smart contracts for them to be used safely. It's probably possible to have some hooks that are not immutable smart contracts that are still safe based on these other constraints, if they sort of only interact with the pools in very specific ways and places. But generally speaking, like, yeah, you know, you have to audit hooks before integrating them into front ends. You have to, and you know, probably shouldn't make your hooks upgradable, but it's, you know, yeah, it's an interesting design space for sure.
Another question from the audience, tangential to this kind of hook conversation. Does the dynamic fee hook mean we can set custom fee tiers or just toggle between existing fee tiers? So yeah, can someone explain, what if a hook turns on dynamic fees, what does that mean?
Mark, you're the dynamic fee maxi, so let us know.
Yeah, I'm the dynamic fee maxi. No, they don't have to do hook. They don't have to do fee tiers. They can set the hook to whatever they want before a swap. Pretty cool. So I don't know. We thought of things like changing the fee based on the volatility of the pool, for example. So like whenever there's we're in a high volume period or a high volatility period, then the fee should go up because there's, you know, more risk on the LPs and obviously like more desire to swap on the pool, more like benefit for arbitrageurs and so on. So that's an interesting idea, but I don't know. I imagine there's many other good ones out there that people could think of.
I'll also quickly add that we do, like, in V3 there were like very fixed constrained fee tiers. You could only deploy pools with specific fee tiers. Hooks can obviously do dynamic, you know, completely arbitrary fees. You can also just do static fee pools like V3, and you can choose any fee level you want for that pool. So any possible number, you know, you can deploy a pool with that, which is nice. So you're no longer like limited to the few options, and you know, the whole Singleton flash accounting stuff makes it more efficient to route across more pools. So that decreases the downsides to potential liquidity fragmentation.
Right. Yeah. So like even outside of potentially dynamic fees, if a pool opts for a static fee, there's essentially no fee tiers. You can really just choose any fee as a pool creator. And I think, you know, on that note, Hayden, about liquidity fragmentation, I think someone else from the audience had a question about it. But yeah, you know, I think it's you know, with all of these different pools that might be created, different hooks, yeah, do we fear lots of liquidity fragmentation? And can you explain a little bit more there of like maybe what kind of designs mitigate that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of also similar to something Noah talked about earlier about like the trade-off of like making decisions for people versus like letting, you know, the world coalesce around things. And I think that like in the past, right, you know, generally, yeah, like, you know, the more fragmented liquidity is like the more like, the greater the cost of routing, and definitely a lot of the things in V4 are trying to reduce the cost of that. But I think that like the down, like what we've found is that like by making Uniswap not expressive enough, more of this like if you can't do dynamic fees in Uniswap, then more people will just try to build things external to Uniswap that do it. And so the sort of fragmentation kind of happens anyway, right? Because if you don't have enough expressive, like people are going to need to continue to innovate and iterate towards the best designs. And if you just constrain the possible designs, then like, you know, you'll just have external fragmentation. And the nice thing about Singleton is it actually like internal fragmentation has a lower cost than external fragmentation. So, you know, more fragmentation within Uniswap is less costly than like more fragmentation across different AMMs because of the sort of efficiency routing gains that you have. And so generally by making Uniswap more expressive, we are trading off greater internal fragmentation for reduced external fragmentation, potentially, if more people build on Uniswap. I'm not saying no one will build anything outside of Uniswap, of course. They will, but they shouldn't. No, they can. So I'd say generally speaking, you know, there will still be shelling points. Like the 1% fee tier for USDC ETH is barely used, even though it exists, because it's not very competitive with the 0.5% you know, fee tier. And I think that like the same thing will happen. Like shelling, like natural shelling points will shelling points just being like, you know, whatever. Like people will kind of coalesce in specific pools because there are like inherent advantages too. And this is kind of like letting the market figure out what is optimal. And I think that sort of is like very aligned with the Uniswap ethos of neutrality and yeah.
Great.
Yeah, I think the last question, I guess, is the one everyone's going to be asking, which is when V5, you know?
If you have an idea of what you want on V5, go and make a pull request on V4 to put it in there.
Yeah,
Exactly. Perfect timing then.
I do think that, like, I don't think that, like, I will to make a hot take of I don't think V4 is the last iteration that will ever happen of Uniswap. I think that, you know, V1, V2, and V3, V1 and V2 each lasted 1 year. V3 lasted 2 years before V4 was announced. Maybe V4 will last even longer than that. But I do think that there's, like, you know, this whole space is so early that, like, hopefully innovation hasn't stopped. And the thing we're building today isn't the best thing that will ever exist. So, you know, continued innovation will always happen, I think.
That's
Right.
a nice Fibonacci sequence. 1, 1, 2.
Exactly.
Ooh. All right. Well, I think we will leave it at that. Thank you guys for joining. Yeah, I think that's all we have.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Perfect.